Hello out there, guys. How are you all doing? Welcome back to Rule of Two Review, and of course, welcome back to my E3 Q&A for 2017. So yes, today is finally the day that we're going to be discussing all of your guys' awesome questions that you have for me about E3 2017 and what kind of things we can expect, what do I think might happen, won't happen, what should happen, what shouldn't happen. It should be noted that I, of course, did ask on both Twitter and Facebook for you guys to give me questions about all things E3, whether it was Nintendo and Switch related, which I knew it would primarily be, Xbox Scorpio, Sony stuff, anything about the other companies like Activision or EA or Ubisoft. And I gotta be honest, it was like 99% Nintendo and Switch related questions. There was very few stuff touching on anything outside of Nintendo. And I knew it would be, like I said, mostly Nintendo stuff, but it was far more than I even expected. So I'm going to basically brand this as just the Nintendo E3 Q&A kind of prediction sort of podcast thing. You know, I'll touch a little bit on those questions that reach outside of Nintendo, but primarily, we're doing Nintendo stuff. And hey, that's okay, because honestly, I love talking about Nintendo and the Switch the most anyway, and the Scorpio is going to be really cool. Very excited to see what's going to happen at all of E3, but let's be honest, we want to see what Nintendo is really going to do with the Switch at their first E3, just 3 months after the console launches. Like I've talked about it so many times, this is really cool and crazy and super exciting, and I'm just excited because I love doing Q&As with you guys. It's so much fun for me. It's literally my favorite kind of video to do, other than like talking about, I don't know, Metroid, because I just love Metroid. I just love doing these guys. So I do have to say, of course, if you want to be a part of these conversations and Q&As and stuff with me in the future, you are invited to, if you would like, follow me on Twitter and Facebook. It's basically Rule of Two Review at both of those locations, and you guys can be involved in these things in the future. And I will say, easily the best turnout for questions I've had for any Q&A I've ever done. They've always done pretty well. You guys come at me with a bunch of questions, but this time, even more so than my pre-Switch Q&A, I had more questions to pick from on both Facebook and Twitter, and I really had to kind of filter through them, and I did the best I could to pick a collection of about 14 or 15. I'm sorry for all of you out there who asked questions that I could not get to, but I can't make this thing 10 hours long. I gotta filter it down and cut it off at some point. So, keep an eye out in the future. I like to do these every few months, as a lot of people know, so if you just keep asking, eventually your question will get answered. Alright, let's get to the goods. The first question today, we're going to start off with some Twitter questions, we'll move to Facebook, and then come back and finish off on Twitter, because that is where most of my questions come from. So, the first question of the day comes from, on Twitter, Nate Crack, at Sergeant Crack. What is up, man? Thanks, of course, for being the first question of the Q&A today. And Nate asks me, do you think we'll see that new Suda51 game at E3, or will he wait for Tokyo Game Show? So, great question, because I love Suda51. I've talked about it so many times. He makes games that are super imperfect and like have like weird gameplay mechanic flaws, but he puts so much style into the games. I like that he tries wacky ideas, very Japanese fundamentals going towards his gameplay design, which I really love, and he always has fantastic and really memorable and interesting main characters. So I'm very excited for whatever he's going to be doing. We all know he showed up at the Nintendo January event in Tokyo, which, although we know why that was ridiculous because the translation was just a freaking disaster, I think it's great that he was there. I think it was meant to be very exciting, and he talked about all these positive things, and for Nintendo to have him present on stage talking about a new game, and he showed my main man, Travis Touchdown, behind him. Whatever he's making, whether it's No More Heroes 3 or something else with or without Travis Touchdown, I think it is going to be obviously a Switch game, exclusive, multi-platform, who knows. Will it show up at E3 this year? I think that there's a pretty good chance it will show up at E3 this year. But I probably would say what you say, Nate, might be more true. There's probably a slightly better chance it's going to show up at Tokyo Game Show, just because it's a huge gaming convention that does happen in Japan. It's not impossible he shows up at E3, of course. He has in the past. It would make sense for him to. But if I was going to wager comparing the new Suda game showing up at E3, I would say 40% possible at E3, but the other 60% probably more likely at Tokyo Game Show. Alright, the next question on Twitter comes from someone who's very active on my channel and a lot of other channels and people who I know on YouTube. The Charizard King, at PokeMadness1996. What is up, buddy? Thank you so much for asking. One of many questions. I had to just pick one of the many that you asked. And this one's an interesting one. I only have so much of an answer. So he asks me, why is a Switch version ruled out when it's not announced with the rest? NDAs exist. It could be announced later on when Nintendo says. So, what I'm pretty sure the question he's asking is, when a big multi-platform game like a Destiny 2 or Red Dead Redemption 2 or whatever is announced, a lot of people, you know, it's typically what we see is these games are announced for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and or PC, and we almost never see the Nintendo version going back to the Wii and the Wii U days, and of course we're kind of seeing a lot of that now with the Switch. So what he's asking is, when that happens, why do people automatically assume that a Switch version won't get announced later? He's saying NDAs exist that maybe prevents companies from stating that a Nintendo version is coming. Let's wait till Nintendo confirms it, yes or no. So that is, I think, exactly the question that you're asking. And I will say, it's a good question, and I see where your head's at, and I like the logic. I feel like the main reason a lot of people, and this even includes myself, even though sometimes I'm more optimistic than I should, and I want to think, oh, you know, we're gonna get Doom announced. I mean, I don't know, we're gonna get Red Dead. I always go to Red Dead. I've tried to not rely on Red Dead and Grand Theft Auto, but I always use those for examples. We're gonna get Red Dead or Grand Theft Auto maybe on the Nintendo console. Like, it could still happen even though they didn't announce it yet. And I have felt that way in the past, but in general, I try to keep my expectations in check. And I think, as far as the rest of the gaming industry and even other Nintendo fans, most people automatically say, well, the Switch version wasn't announced, so I guess we're not getting that on the Switch. The reason is because, honestly, man, that's just what we're used to seeing happen. That's just the way it typically plays out. I mean, think about how often a multi-platform game is announced without a Nintendo version. How many times can you remember where we were surprised later down the road that a Nintendo version was happening? I bet you can count on one hand the number of times that that's happened. And I say this as the biggest Nintendo fan that wants these third-party games on my Nintendo console, but I gotta be real, it just doesn't happen very often. I mean, Call of Duty Ghosts is like the only one that's jumping to mind where the Wii U version wasn't immediately announced, but then a month or so later was confirmed to be coming. I do think there's a lot of signs pointing to that happening with World War II this time, so I think we may see that happen with Call of Duty. Yes, I will give you Call of Duty. But as far as other games, they just confirmed Destiny isn't coming. We already had it confirmed, like, Titanfall isn't going to come. I do not expect Red Dead Redemption, even though I think these games should be on the Switch. And I think there's a huge market. Overwatch is another one. We all want these games, and I think that they would perform and sell very well, and Nintendo gamers would eat them up. But it's probably just not going to happen. So I get that. I appreciate your faith and the fact that you want to believe a lot of these games could still come. But the reason everyone does basically rule out Switch versions right away when they're not announced is because we know the story, man. We know what's going to happen. This is what happens. I do believe Nintendo is working to fix this, and I'm hoping that in the, you know, by years 2 or 3 of the Switch's life, we do start to see these games coming day and date and announced day and date with the multi-platform announcements. But for right now, there's no reason to think that's going to happen. In my opinion, with the rare exception, like with World War II, Call of Duty, if we don't see the Switch version revealed right away, it's very unlikely that Switch version is going to get announced later. I know we all want it, and I know you want it, but let's be real, that's just not how these things usually happen. Next question on Twitter comes from Mark at Scheiderroots89, I believe is hopefully how you pronounce that. What's up, buddy? Thanks for the question. Mark asks me, do you think we'll get a Rayman 4 at Ubisoft's press conference, considering it would be great on the Nintendo Switch? Very good question. I love me some Rayman. Rayman Legends is maybe my favorite 2D platformer of all time, if we rule out, like, Super Metroid and stuff like that, which I think is kind of a different kind of 2D side-scrolling game. But as far as just, like, straight-up platformers, I love Rayman Legends. The original Rayman on the PlayStation is, like, one of my all-time favorite games. Do I think we'll see Rayman 4? I think I'm a little hesitant to say yes, but I actually am going to still say yes, I think we will. My predictions video that I made for E3 a couple of days ago, I discussed how I think we will see something new from Ubisoft. I talked about I don't think we're going to get beyond Good and Evil 2. I think we're going to see something new from Ubisoft. I think a new IP is most likely, but I also think we might get a revival of some other things, and Rayman 4, a new Rayman, would definitely fit within that. Now, I'm noticing you mentioned Rayman 4, and Rayman 4 could be different than a sequel to Legends, because we all know they made Raymans 1, 2, and 3, and then they kind of went off into weird territory and did Origins and Legends, which are great games. And so they could release a game that's in the Legends style and make a sequel to Legends, or they could make a game that they call Rayman 4, and that could be something entirely different. Maybe they go back to the 3D thing, or who knows what they would do. regardless, I do think it's a pretty good chance we see Rayman return this year. I sure hope we do. Would it be exclusive to the Switch? Would it come to the Switch? I think it would definitely be multi-platform on the Switch. I mean, almost 100%. At bare minimum, it's multi-platform. Exclusive? Tough call, because we all know how Legends played out with the Wii U, where it was supposed to be exclusive, but it ended up not being exclusive, and then they delayed it, and it was a big controversial disaster. Although I will remind you guys that Rayman Legends on the Switch was without question phenomenal because of the gamepad. Yes, the gamepad made that game super great. I loved the gamepad on that game. So that was a weird kind of thing on how it played out. But ultimately, will we see it at the conference? Will it come to the Switch? Yes, I think we'll see it, although there's a pretty good chance we won't. I ultimately think yes, we'll see it, and yeah, I definitely think it's going to come to the Switch. On Twitter, George Woods at GeorgeWoods3 asks me, do you think companies will change the tone of their conferences / overall E3 presence due to the event now being available to the public? Great question. Of course, he's referencing the fact that for the first time ever, they made 15,000 public tickets available just for sale, for purchase online. And shout outs to my good buddy Robert, who runs the channel Gaming With Me. We did the podcast. I went out to visit him in New York, and we went to the Nintendo Switch thing in January. Got to play it hands-on months before the console released. And he is going to E3. He did buy a ticket, and I know that he's making it out there to LA next month, which is going to be really great. Very excited for him. Do I think that anything about the conference or the show will be different because it's open to the public? Yes and no. I don't think the conferences are going to change at all, because a little bit of E3 insight I can give you if you don't already know this. And I even attended E3 in 2004, I like to talk about, so I know this even from firsthand experience. Those conferences are not available to the public, not even this year with tickets. The conferences specifically, where Sony and Microsoft, and in the past, Nintendo had taken the stage to talk to people, that is gaming press primarily. I mean, I'm sure there's ways for a couple of random people to kind of get into those for whatever, but for the most part, that is only press. That is people live tweeting, live blogging, taking notes, capturing video, preparing video content for their big websites. That's where IGN and GameSpot and probably Giant Bomb and all these different things, Game Informer, back in the day, game trailers would have been there. That's where those people are. That's not the public. So there's no reason to think anything about the conferences will be different. They're going to do it the exact way that they would have presented it, whether the public was attending E3 or not, I believe. As far as the show floor, it's possible, because I think that they have to account for probably a larger number of people attending due to 15,000 extra people, and the fact that typically people still associated with the industry in some weird way are the people going to that trade show. I got to go in 2004 because I worked for GameStop, and same with my other friend who worked for GameStop and my girlfriend at the time who worked for like a video DVD store, and we qualified as working as in the industry, quote unquote, and that's how we were able to get free E3 badges way back when. Nowadays, I think it's still kind of the same, but it's also more strict. All of a sudden, regular old people who just love gaming, can now buy tickets and attend. So there might be something with how they present the show floor and the things that they make available to play and look at that might be a little bit different to account for that kind of audience and the fact that more people might be there. But I still think that overall it's going to be kind of the same. It's a good question, though, because this is unprecedented territory, and maybe that turns out to be wrong, and we see that they did some really crazy, cool, different things because regular people are attending. So, you know, that's going to be fun to find out, and we'll just have to see next month. Next question on Twitter comes from a very cool, special person who gets a pretty unique shout-out here. This comes from R-Wing Attack at R-Wing Attack. R-Wing Attack, also, by the way, a brand new YouTube channel that he just started within the last couple of weeks. And he hit me up months ago on Facebook and kind of asked for a little bit of advice on getting a YouTube channel started. He then has since started it, and it's actually doing pretty well for being only like a month old. So major props to you, buddy. Really glad to see what's going on. Please check it out. You can find it, of course, on YouTube at R-Wing Attack. Anyway, his question is, what are some accessories you would love to see Nintendo release for the Switch? The yellow Joy-Cons look awesome. I agree. The yellow Joy-Cons do look pretty cool. So honestly, my answer to this question is I don't really want that many accessories. When I think about too many accessories, it reminds me of all the Guitar Hero and Rock Band stuff and how the Wii days played out with all the extra garbage that people had. I mean, think of the days when everyone had all these boxes of just plastic random extra things hanging out in their house or in a closet, and it's like, honestly, I hate that stuff. I'm done with it. So those kinds of accessories, like the way you'd buy certain things to like slide the Joy-Con into or whatever, like for the most part, I can't really think of much of that stuff that I want to see. Now, when you think about practical accessories like carrying cases or grips or things that change the color or the look of your Switch or your controllers, that stuff is fine. And I mean, hey man, bring on a Metroid carrying case, bring on a Metroid skin for my Joy-Cons or for my Pro Controller. I'm all about that stuff. You know, and if you want to do like retro themed, where we've seen a lot of stuff where people are like customizing their Joy-Cons and their Nintendo Switch docks to look like NESs and Super NESs and stuff, that's fine. That stuff is totally fun, and I'm all about those kinds of things. Give me Metroid and give me retro NES stuff. That would be cool. That's probably the closest to any accessories for the Switch I would like to see. All right, let's move over to Facebook for a couple of questions. On Facebook, again, I love the Facebook questions because you guys actually can give me longer form questions and type out more of your question for me, because Facebook isn't limited to 140 characters. So I always really appreciate that. Anywho, on Facebook, first question comes from Devin Henriksen. Devin asks me, do you think they are trying to temper our expectations again with this pre-E3 announcement? I'll get to that in a second. They know we want Metroid, and I'm still hopeful, but I have a feeling they said 2017 games, quote unquote, for this particular purpose. So, what I'm saying here is, when he says temper our expectations with this pre-E3 announcement, I think what he's getting at is what he puts in air quotes here, that they basically said they are going to focus on Super Mario Odyssey and games for 2017. And when I made my video discussing the announcement of this, the E3 Spotlight from Nintendo, I mentioned how I kind of picked that part of their phrasing out, had they mentioned 2017 games. And, you know, I discussed at length, I won't go into it here, but I discussed how it's interesting how they're still, it seems like they're still focusing on games for just the immediate future. They're not talking about beyond into next year. And I would like them to have been doing that this year. And now a lot of people pointed out maybe they still will talk about some games for next year. They're just not going to focus on them. And that is a possibility. Sure, I'll give you guys that. But I feel like for the most part, maybe they'll surprise us, but I feel like for the most part, they were being pretty truthful with this whole thing about, you know, we're focusing on 2017 games. I really think that that's what they're going to focus on for the most part, with a couple of minor exceptions, sure, but I think it's going to be like 90% the 2017 show. That's what we're going to see, and that's okay. Like, I would have liked 2018, but I mean, it is what it is. I'm very excited for what's going to happen this year, so that's going to be great. And so what Devin is asking me is, do I think that they're trying to temper our expectations, and maybe they're even going to plan a surprise? Yeah, I think there could be something to that. Maybe they don't want to get too many hopes up for stuff, you know, because I do believe they're working on things like Metroid or Animal Crossing or other big surprises, first-party things, another Star Fox game for a couple of years down the road. And so are they trying to tell us, don't expect those kinds of things, only expect the few things we already know about, and maybe one or two other surprises for this year? And yes, I do think that that's probably what they were doing. They want us to know, we're just going to talk about the stuff that you basically have already heard. We're going to focus on Odyssey. You'll get some information about, you know, Fire Emblem Warriors and all these other things. I don't want to get too much into that for later questions, but I think that that's what they're trying to do. So maybe I get proven wrong. Maybe you guys who agree with me get proven wrong, but for the most part, I think that's what we're going to see. All right, this question on Facebook is pretty fantastic. This comes from Patrick Toe. Patrick asked me, which E3 was the best one, and why is it E3 2004? So I think there might even be like a little bit of a fun sort of joke happening there. Maybe you phrased the question differently than you meant it, or maybe you're just kind of having fun. Because for me, there's no question 2004 was the best E3. Yes, I attended E3 2004, and that made it excellent for me. But I also think when you look at everything that happened in the swath of games across all companies that year, not to mention that is the introduction of Reggie, and it was the introduction of the DS, and it was the first time we saw Twilight Princess and Miyamoto came out. It's the one last thing, the trailer everyone cried at, Miyamoto with the Master Sword and the Hylian Shield and all that stuff. That was Nintendo's E3, and then you throw in the fact that Halo 2 was there, Knights of the Old Republic 2 was there, Metal Gear Solid 3, one of the brand new Gran Turismo that year, StarCraft Ghost. I played StarCraft Ghost that year before it got canceled. Devil May Cry 3, God of War, the first one was there for the first time. I mean, I could keep going on and on. Star Fox Assault, Resident Evil 4, Beautiful Joe. What do you want? I'll keep naming games. There were so many games from all companies that year. It was insane. And then, of course, I was there looking and playing all this stuff. It was so fantastic. Metroid Prime 2, by the way, was another big one from Nintendo. Advance Wars on the GameCube was there. I could just keep going. So it was really great for all those reasons. That's why it was the best. I'm assuming, Patrick, maybe you also agree that it was 2004. There's been other great years. I'd actually love to hear you guys make cases for other years that you think might be better. A lot of you younger guys might not even know how great 2004 was, but trust me, there's no question that 2004 was the all-time king of E3. Next question on Facebook is one of the few that delves outside of Nintendo. Thank goodness I had something that kind of does. So, on Facebook, Matthew John Daniel Welch, you have quite a long name there, buddy. Matthew asks me, hey Rob, what are your current expectations for what will be shown off by Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo? And who do you think will have the best show? Keep up the good work. I've been watching since about E3 2014. So awesome. Thanks, Matthew. I appreciate you being a fan for so long. I love that you're a fan of the videos and my bearded face. And really good question. I love that you kind of asked a wider question. I kind of did discuss a lot of this, to be fair, because I made 2 different videos making big predictions for Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, and even like Square and Ubisoft a little bit as well. But overall, as far as Microsoft goes, obviously we can expect probably a pretty big push for Scorpio. There's a chance that they do a weird kind of paper-thin reveal for Scorpio. I've kind of been thinking that, like, what if they make it a smaller focus than we're expecting? I mean, it could become the focus of their entire show, or it could become maybe just a couple little minutes where they talk about it, they show it, and oh, it's coming out in November, whatever, in the end. Maybe that's all it is, so who knows? But ultimately, I still would expect a pretty big focus there. I do randomly expect a couple of new exclusive games to be shown. At least one will be first party. They've got to do it this year because everyone talks about the drought of exclusive content on the Xbox, and that is true. I think this would be a great chance for them to basically show us that that's not going to be happening. They're not going to have Halo 6, which is so stupid, so who even knows? Sony, I think we're going to get a new IP, like we said. I think Bloodborne 2. I'm crossing my fingers for a Bloodborne 2. We're going to get PS4 Pro talk. I don't expect a whole lot of, if any, VR talk on stage, although I do think it will be present at E3. And Nintendo, I mean, I've talked about that as well. You know, we're obviously going to get mostly Mario Odyssey stuff. I think we'll get information about Xenoblade. I think we'll get 1 or 2 surprises, but I don't think it's going to be anything too huge, unfortunately. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You know, as far as the best show, that's tough. I think Sony is for sure going to be better than Microsoft no matter what. It's Microsoft's game to win or lose, and I think that they're probably going to do fine, but I don't think it's going to be incredible. I think Sony, this would be the 3rd year in a row where they've been really on top of it, so I expect Sony to have a good show again. Nintendo is always the up in the air. Is this going to be great with the E3 Spotlight, or is it going to be a little bit underwhelming, you know, like 2015's Direct and stuff? I think that they're going to do pretty darn well. I have very high expectations for Nintendo. Do I think it will be perceived as the best show by the end of the show? Tough to say. Maybe. If they absolutely kill it, of course. I mean, that happened in 2014. So yes, they could kill it. I expect them to have a slightly better than average show. That's actually what I'm realizing I expect from Nintendo at this point. You know, I expect something that we might call like a B+, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that, so I don't think anyone should feel disappointed with that. I'm shooting for a B+ showing from Nintendo with the hope to be surprised with an A or an A+, of course. And I'm expecting around a B+ for Sony and maybe, you know, a B- or a C+ for Microsoft. So those are just random guesses. I guess we'll just kind of see. But this is the fun, is to predict how it's all going to shake out. All right, next Facebook question comes from Dylan Ochoa. And Dylan asks me, what do you think will be some big third-party or indie announcements at E3? I ask this because this year it seems there will be an even bigger focus on them due to the E3 Coliseum. Good question, and a little bit tough to answer. The indies is hard to answer because I don't really know how to predict what kind of indie announcements we would get. Partly because I don't really play or get too much into indies, even though I recognize they're great, so no one freak out. I'm not dissing them. I just don't really play them or get too excited about them. And also because I don't really know how you predict indies. Like, it's just such a different world in terms of the gameplay and like what we can expect. All I can say is I think we'll get some new indies announced. I mean, every year for many years in a row now, we've been seeing brand new indie titles, pretty high profile ones too, get announced, you know, every year for all the consoles, all the platforms, PC, all that stuff. So I definitely expect new indie games to be announced. That's all that I can say there. As far as actual third-party titles for like the consoles and or PC, I don't know that I can exactly predict titles. I mean, I sort of have done that in the past, like, you know, Bloodborne and whatnot. But I even discussed this again on my predictions video. I think we're going to get a brand new announcement of a game from Platinum Studios. I don't know what it's going to be exactly. Yes, Bayonetta 3 I think is very possible, but I don't think it's a lock it's Bayonetta 3. You know, it could be something that's a multi-platform. It could be something that's exclusive to any one console, which I would see being, basically, is either be Nintendo or Sony, and probably Nintendo, which is very exciting. It could be a sequel to a previous game, like a Bayonetta, like a Wonderful 101, like a Vanquish or a Mad World, or it could be a brand new IP. It's going to be something, but whatever it is, it's going to be a title from Platinum that we have not yet heard of. I do think they are bringing a brand new game to E3 this year, which is super exciting. I already touched on this in this video as well. Ubisoft, I think the same thing. I think we're getting a brand new, unheard of title from Ubisoft. I think that we might even get two. I think that we are very likely to see a brand new IP from Ubisoft. And I discussed this. I do think that Mario and plus Rabbids crazy, ridiculous game does have a really good shot at showing up. I have talked to some people behind the scenes. I have seen some things behind the scenes. I know some things that make it look like that game really is probably real. So I'm not 100% saying it yet, but it's pretty likely. So maybe we see that game. So I think we're going to get some new things from Ubisoft. Square, I don't expect anything brand new. EA, maybe. And when it comes to the consoles, for the Nintendo Switch, I do expect an exclusive new IP from a third party. I absolutely do. And I'm not going to 100% say what company that might be, but some new third-party game that is exclusive to the Switch I think we're going to get. Could be really exciting if it's something awesome. And I also think the same thing will happen for the PS4. For the PS4, we might even get more than one, because Sony's been really working hard the last couple of years, and I have to give them credit for this. I think they've done a really good job there. So I do expect an exclusive third-party IP to the Switch, and I do expect one also for the PS4. All right, last Facebook question for the day, coming from Brandy Chandler. And Brandy asks me, do you think a Fire Emblem Switch trailer will be shown, or will they wait until a future direct in the fall? In my opinion, they will do a direct Fire Emblem focused in the fall for Q1 or Q2 launch. Perhaps months apart, like they are doing with Echoes in Japan and US. Barely a month between releases. Thanks. Keep up the good work. Whew! That was actually kind of a hard question to read, Brandy, but thank you so much. I really do appreciate it, and I like the question. The main focus of that is, do I think a Fire Emblem Switch trailer will be shown, or will they wait till a direct in the fall? I'm mostly going to agree with you, Brandy, that I think we're going to probably see, for the new Fire Emblem game, I think that we're going to see that after E3. Probably exactly what you said. I mean, you nailed it. I think in the fall, we're going to get a direct from Nintendo, whether it's Fire Emblem focused or maybe just a broad direct. I know you think maybe it would be just like a Fire Emblem direct. I don't think they would give us two Fire Emblem directs in the same year. That just seems silly to me. It's not impossible, but I don't really expect it. I think it would just be a regular direct, and through that, they will officially reveal the brand new actual Fire Emblem title for the Switch at that time. At E3 this year, I expect just honestly a focus on Fire Emblem Warriors for the Switch. And I'm okay with that because I'm very excited for that game. We've seen so little of it that it would almost feel like a new game. I would love to see that new Fire Emblem game. I'm really excited for what that's going to be. But honestly, I really have to think. I just expect Fire Emblem Warriors this year. All right, let's move ourselves back to Twitter here for another question we have from Maui at Link. Maui, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. Hopefully I am, but thanks for the question. Maui asks me, do you think that Nintendo will show something like an HD remake of a 16-bit or 64-bit game at E3? And possibly, I sure would love that, man. There are so many games from either era that I would love to see. Unfortunately, the 64-bit game would probably be more likely because we've seen what it looks like for companies to take games from that sort of mid-90s, you know, polygon graphics era style and make that, kind of modernize that up and do things with it, or make it just HD, like with Banjo-Kazooie and stuff like that, or even like Wind Waker. So I think that just seems to be easier and more common, and something that companies feel works with today's gamer a little bit better, and I understand why. So I think if one of those was going to happen from Nintendo, it would more than likely be a Nintendo 64 game. But man, there's a lot of 16-bit games I'd love to see, man. I mean, think of when you look at A Link Between Worlds. It is a sequel to A Link to the Past. Yes, it's not the exact same game, but imagine if it was. Like, imagine if they just remade A Link to the Past and made it look and play just like A Link Between Worlds. I mean, that would be a good example of how you could take a 16-bit era game and modernize it. And that was on the 3DS, which is far less powerful and capable hardware than the frickin' Switch, which could do a whole lot more. So imagine if they took a Super Metroid or a Castlevania 4 or what, I mean so many different games we could name, and made that some sort of HD remake thing for today. it could be incredible. And if they put a really, like, a lot of time and money into it, it could be something that would be so substantial of a remake. It could be like a $60 brand new game. Forget Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. That's the $60, you know, port of an old generation game I want to see on the Switch. If you do that to Super Metroid, forget about it. I'm going to be crying like a man baby with excitement if we saw something like that. So, but, you know, I'm going to remind you, I don't expect that. It's possible we get like a small scale one. I don't expect that. I feel like it would more than likely be a Nintendo 64 game, and honestly, I would probably still be excited for that. Okay, next question on Twitter comes from Jackson at Jacksuni. Jackson, it's hard to pronounce these names sometimes, guys. So, at Jacksuni, I believe is how you say that, asks me, what are your top 3 most wanted virtual console games that aren't already on the Wii, Wii U, or 3DS eShop? Great question that I'm excited to answer, but I have to kind of change your question a little bit. I don't have the very full extensive knowledge of what games are available on the Virtual Console on all of the consoles. I've perused them a couple of times for sure, and I've bought a few games, but I just don't really buy that many Virtual Console games because I've been waiting for very specific things to come, and I know that they haven't been around, at least recently. So I just don't even know. So the first two are going to be Vector Man for the Sega Genesis and Earthworm Jim for either the Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo. I do think that those games have probably been made available on one of the Virtual Consoles in the past, which is fine, and I never went back and purchased them if that's the case. But I even said this on Twitter, I am craving those two games so freaking badly. Vector Man is like probably the last Genesis game I think that we owned before moving to probably the 64 at the time. I don't remember, man. It's so many consoles we had growing up. And Vector Man was awesome. I love the graphics. I love the setting, the style, the music, everything. I love the Genesis, man. The Genesis is an awesome console. Haters be damned. The Genesis was incredible. And I even love the controller. Some people want to cry about the controller. You're wrong. It's a great controller, especially the 6-button controller. And so I just want to play Vector Man so badly. And Earthworm Jim is such a classic. Oh my gosh. I don't care what version I get, man. I just want to play Earthworm Jim 1 and or 2. And I'd even love another 2D remake. We don't talk about Earthworm Jim 3D. But if we got a remake of 1 or 2 or a sequel, man, that would be so fantastic. So those are games I would like to see come, like the Genesis versions on a Genesis Virtual Console on the Switch. That's what I would like to see. Another one I actually was going to leave out, I almost forgot. Kid Chameleon, which is another Genesis game that I just freaking love. And I know that actually has been made available on the Wii U's or Virtual Console, I believe, because I think I purchased that. Or maybe that was the Wii's. I do think that I purchased that game at some point in the past, but I want to see it come back. I want it available on my Switch, just like with Vector Man and with Earthworm Jim. And now the last one I want, I know for a fact, has never come to any Virtual Console, and I've been dying for this game, and that is Wizards and Warriors on the NES. And even more than that, I would actually prefer Iron Sword Wizards and Warriors 2, which is very famous for having Fabio on the cover looking like Conan holding the sword. That was actually Fabio. And I freaking love those games. Some of the best music ever put into a video game ever since the first video game was ever created. And I love those games so much. It's such a great medieval adventure that's like an action, but also has like weird RPG elements and this and like this cool fantasies kind of side to the story. So good, man. I would love to play those games, and they've never come to the Virtual Console. So I guess that's 4 games that I gave you, but at the end of the day, those are the games I would most like to see. Alrighty, guys, just a few more. We're back on Twitter, like I said, coming from Sonic Man the Best at SonicMan4321. What is up, buddy? Thanks for the question. He asks me, do you think that Nintendo will show off the SNES Mini at E3, he means, or do you think it would wait until fall? It might drown the Switch. Okay, good question. No, I don't think we're going to see the SNES Mini, at least not at E3. I just don't think that's going to happen. I have talked about how I think it's going to happen, and then, you know, within days of me discussing that, actually, is when it became a huge rumor that apparently everyone's like, oh, we know it's coming, it's going to happen. So that just blew up out of nowhere. It's still not confirmed, so I think that there is definitely a chance that it won't show up also, that it won't, that it's not even real, I should say. But assuming it's real, I don't think that they're going to talk about it at E3. It doesn't feel like an E3 kind of topic for Nintendo to go over. It's another thing that's not impossible, but I just don't really see that happening. I think that they would probably show it later in the fall. And as far as it drowning the Switch, I don't agree with that. I don't think anything is going to stop the momentum of the Switch, especially if E3 is solid, and especially if Mario, you know, that comes out this year. That's going to be so freaking good. Everyone's going to be buying Switches throughout the rest of 2017. And the SNES would obviously be a huge deal. We saw what happened with the NES Classic. The same thing would happen with the SNES Mini. Yes, it would be a huge deal. That's impossible to find, and it's all over the news. But I don't think that it's gonna like eat into the Switch's momentum or sales or its visibility in the press. I feel like they would just both be huge products that Nintendo has on the market that everyone's talking about and everyone's trying to go out and buy. And it would only be a good thing, and it would just really come down to if Nintendo actually has the SNES Minis in stock, if in fact it's real, and if it's revealed before the end of the year. Okay, next question on Twitter comes from Samir at Mighty Pelipper. And Samir asks me, do you think that any 3DS exclusive franchises to show up on the Nintendo Switch, and how do you think they would transition to HD graphics? Okay, so I think what Samir is asking is, do I think we'll see any of the franchises that we've typically known to be exclusive to the 3DS? Do I think that they will show up as a Switch version at E3, and how will they look visually? Good question. Yeah, I think it's a pretty good chance at E3 that Nintendo discusses that. I mean, it's tough because, you know, we've all talked about this. You know, franchises that have been 3DS games and the fact that they can now come to the Switch. I've talked about it, but I started to think about this question. I'm like, gosh, how many are there that we know to really be exclusive to the 3DS? And I don't think that there's as many as we maybe think at first. There's just a couple of really, really big ones, to be fair. The ones that jump to mind, Pokemon and Monster Hunter most immediately. And, you know, keeping in mind that Pokemon has had a lot of spin-off games show up on consoles over the years. And as far as Monster Hunter, it hasn't always been exclusive to the to handhelds and the 3DS because it was on the PSP, and of course it also got a release on the Wii. And I think there's even been PS2 games in the past. Only in the last couple of years, and with the last 3 or 4 releases, has it become exclusive to the 3DS and handheld only. So there's those two franchises, and then of course there's also Fire Emblem, which, you know, there was the Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, I think were they're called, like the 2 GameCube Radiant games. Those were console games. And so it has been on the console in the past, but obviously it is primarily, overwhelmingly, a handheld and portable only franchise historically in the past. So those are the 3 franchises that jump to me as 3DS exclusive games, even though there are kind of asterisks to all of those. Fire Emblem, Pokemon, Monster Hunter, and yes, I will say I think we're going to see some of those. We know we're getting Fire Emblem Warriors, and we know that Nintendo's making a Switch Fire Emblem game. So that's already kind of taken care of. I think we're going to see Fire Emblem Warriors at the show at E3. Monster Hunter or Pokemon. Can't yet say that Nintendo is ready to show off Monster Hunter, and there are rumors about what's going to happen with that series anyway. It's going to come to the Switch at some point, though. I absolutely believe that. I don't know that we're going to see it at E3 this year. Pokemon, I do believe. I said that in my predictions video, and I stand by that. A couple of people started to talk about, oh, well, you know, don't forget Nintendo's never really shown Pokemon at E3. Okay, that's true. But honestly, I don't think that that logic necessarily applies to Nintendo going into this E3. If Nintendo's making some sort of Pokemon game for the Switch, which, let's be honest, they obviously are, they're not stupid, Pokemon's coming to the Switch at some point. If they're making it, and if it was ready to show, why wouldn't they show it at E3? Just because, well, we're not supposed to show it at E3. We have a rule. It's written in stone. Do not reveal Pokemon at E3. Like, no, that's not the case. If they wanted to show it, they absolutely would show it for sure. Yes, they like to do directs to reveal Pokemon games, but that's been in the past. I think that we're in an era of Nintendo where a lot of the things they typically do, they might not do anymore, or they're changing how they do things. Just like, I mean, the fact that they're branding, you know, E3 this year as a spotlight and no longer calling it a digital direct, to me says something. Even if the format's the same, the fact that they're calling it something different shows that Nintendo is changing their image and changing their brand a little bit to account for the release of the Switch and this new era of Nintendo, what I've been calling the new era of Nintendo. And through that, I think one of the many things they would be willing to consider doing differently would be revealing a Pokemon game. Is it possible it doesn't show up and they do the same thing they've always done later in the year at a Direct? Sure, maybe they do still do the same thing. But I don't think it rules out the fact that we could see Pokemon on the Switch show up. So I expect to see it. It's one of my big bets, and I'm standing by that. And I think as far as the visuals, I mean, a Monster Hunter is going to be gorgeous on the Switch. We know that. Fire Emblem is going to be gorgeous on the Switch. We know that. Pokemon, I don't know what they would do there. And again, I don't play Pokemon, so I don't have all the experience, but I've seen plenty of footage of previous Pokemon games. And that's one where I could almost see them weirdly staying kind of true to the 3DS visual style, at least for the first outing on a Pokemon game. If they didn't want to go off the rails and make a huge, large-scale, you know, something to the size of like a Mario Galaxy sort of scale game, not gameplay guys, but scale, where they make a huge console Pokemon game. If they wanted to make it tried and true with those with the handheld games, it might look kind of similar, in which case it might not be super impressive graphically, but I don't really expect that. I feel like by the time we see Pokemon on the Switch, it's going to look pretty awesome. It's going to have a new graphical style. Maybe it's some 3D adventure. Who even knows? But I think it's going to look pretty cool. Alrighty, guys, and we finally made it to the last question of the day, which is good because I feel like I'm wearing my voice out. I've been talking for too long. So many questions. So the last question is actually two questions from the same person. Comes from on Twitter at TIP@TIPositron, which I happen to know stands for the Introverted Positron, which I've said before. I love that name because I love long words. Anyway, TIP asks me, what do you think is the one thing Nintendo needs to reveal at E3 this year? And he also goes on to ask me, what do you think are the chances of a new Metroid game being announced at this E3? So, we got to get into this a little bit, obviously, so that's why I thought it was a good question to end with. The first part of your question, what do I think is the one thing Nintendo needs to reveal at E3 this year? It's hard to be specific here, so I'm just going to say they need to announce a new entry in a franchise that we have not heard from yet. And that could be myriad different things. We all know the kind of franchises we could hear from that I think would be exciting. I think it would be smart for them to reveal an Animal Crossing game. I think that's very likely for next year. If it was revealed this year, I think it would at least release next year. It sure ain't going to be a 2017 game. It would be nice if they just showed us one big, huge franchise for the future, for beyond 2017. Really, I don't want to get too much into franchises, you know, F-Zero, Animal Crossing, whatever. That's what they need to do. Because I know they're focusing mostly on 2017, but as I've said, I think it's so smart to give us a promise of the future long term, at least once. Damn it, Nintendo, just do it one time. Show us games beyond this year. And I think that if they did that and they showed us, you know, Star Fox is coming back and Animal Crossing is coming back, that's what people want. That's the exciting things that we want to definitely see. Pikmin 4, whatever the case may be, I think that they need to give us something like that. Which does segue into the next part of your question. What are the chances of a new Metroid game being announced at this E3? I am one of the few who's going against the grain and bucking the trend and saying I don't really expect Metroid this year. And this is coming from the biggest Metroid fan. And you think I'd be the one who'd be most blinded by my fanship and say, oh, it's coming this year, it's gotta happen. No, I don't believe it's happening, you guys. And I know that there are rumors, and I love these rumors because I want Metroid to show up. You guys understand, I want to be wrong here. But I have to be true to myself, and, you know, I'm going to stick to it. I think it's very unlikely. I'm going to say 30% chance it shows up, which means 70% chance it doesn't show up. That's my percentage. That's my prediction. I don't really expect it, which leads into that first part of your question. I think they need to show us a returning franchise of some form, but I don't think it's going to be Metroid. It could be, and if it was, it would be the biggest thing that they could possibly announce at the show, and that would be the greatest thing that they could do. But my money is on it not being Metroid. So I think it would be something else. Like I said, Animal Crossing, Star Fox, Pikmin, F-Zero. Those are the kinds of things, I think, if they gave us something like that. Kid Icarus, you know, if they gave us one of those, it'd be great. Or Smash Brothers, you know, I hope it would not be the Wii U Smash Brothers. I'm not really into them doing that again. I would rather just be a new Smash, so... But regardless... That's what I think that they need to do, and that's how much I don't think we're going to see Metroid, you guys. I know we want it, and I always remind you guys, I do believe Nintendo is working on Metroid. I've stated this before, and I'm repeating myself, but it's important to this conversation. Don't worry, because I think Nintendo is making Metroid for the Switch. What kind of Metroid game? We don't know. I'm not quite so sure. Is it retro? Is it not? I don't think so. But I do think they're making a Metroid game. I just personally believe that it's not ready to show at this year's E3. Am I going to be proven wrong and we see 2 Metroid games announced at one time? I mean, maybe. That rumor just seems insane to me because it just doesn't feel like what Nintendo would do. And I will say, I know that they did do that once before. Metroid Prime and Metroid Fusion launched at the exact same time. You know, 2 Metroid games at the same time back in 2002. So they did it once, yes, 15 years ago and 3 console generations ago. But this isn't the same Nintendo nowadays. It's not the same kind of console they have on the market. It's not the same kind of gaming industry. I just don't think that what they did with one franchise 15 years ago and 3 generations ago has any bearing on what Nintendo would do in 2017 and 2018. I just don't think that. If you guys think I'm crazy, that's fine, but think about that. That's why I really don't believe that that necessarily means they're working on 2 Metroid games. If they are working on 2 Metroid games, that's great. I don't think it has any relation to Prime and Fusion in 2002, but I do think that that would be great, and I would love to see this happen, you guys. This would be like the clouds would part and the birds would sing. I would be thrilled if that happened, but I don't expect it. And if it happens, it's probably just going to be 1 game. So anyway, I'm dragging this on. The point is, we need a returning franchise, and I don't expect to see Metroid, sadly, at E3 this year. And that is it, guys. Whew! Finally wrapped up a very long E3, mostly Nintendo-centric Q&A for this year. As I said, so many questions I couldn't get to, so I'm sorry for that, guys. But thank you to everybody who asked questions, the people whose questions I did answer, the people whose questions I couldn't get to. E3 is just a couple of weeks away. Nintendo's probably going to kill it. I think everyone's going to have a good show. Very curious to see what the Scorpio turns into. Very excited to see what Nintendo is going to show us about their vision for the Switch. This is it. This is when they're going to show us what the Switch is really supposed to mean to us, I think, you guys. So, let's be excited for E3, for Nintendo Spotlight, for Sony, the Scorpio, whatever's happening. There's third-party games I'm excited for, like Destiny 2, things like that. It's going to be a great time, man. I think it's going to be a really good E3. So that's it. Please discuss all of the questions and topics that I touched on today. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. Thank you for asking me questions. Reminder, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter to get involved with this stuff in the future as well. And that'll be it today, guys. I'm going to wrap it up. This, of course, is Rob from Rule of 2 Review. Thanks, as always, for tuning in, and I will catch you next time on another video.